absolute shit. That tends to be the consensus of many people who are or were once Pokemon fans. I mean, when ZA was out and everyone started playing it, that's all you heard online.
Wow, I can't believe people still play this.
What are these graphics? Come on, Pokemon!
Many people truly saw and still see Pokemon as nothing more than a shameless cash grab these days, with the games being nothing but half-assed, low-quality products. And what if I told you that they're kinda right? Today I want to do a bit of a retrospective on Pokemon's quality throughout the years, and see if the games today are comparatively lower quality than what they used to be. And with my completely non-biased, objectively correct opinion, I think we can crack it. So, if you enjoy this kind of content and want to see more, then please consider leaving a like and or subscribing. And with that, let's see if this shit's true or not. As I'm sure most of, if not all of you know, Pokemon started out on the Game Boy back in 1996 with the release of Pokemon Red and Green, later coming to the US in 1998 with Red and Blue. However, as I'm also sure that not all of you know, that at the time of Pokemon's release, these games were not only considered good-ass games, they were also considered incredibly high-quality games, constantly getting praised for its graphics, use of a core collecting mechanic, and other in-depth mechanics such as capturing, trading, and training. Nintendo Power even gave it a rating of 7.2 out of 10, which is pretty f***ing high for the time, with game design and satisfaction getting an 8.2 and 7.4 respectively. These games even got their own 2 pages within GamePro magazine, one of the go-to magazines for gaming in the 90s, explaining the whole craze and wave of Pokemon with high regards. Obviously, people thought Pokemon was a hot ticket item at the time of its debut, a product that delivered nothing but quality to the surprise of many since it was mainly, if not exclusively, a handheld title. Being half-assed was far out of the question for these first 2 games. However, unfortunately, the same can't be said for their sequels, Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Silver. This is when the whole
Pokemon designs are getting lazy
argument was born. You see, Gold and Silver didn't really do too much to spice up the formula, aside from adding new Pokemon, breeding, 2 new whole types being Dark and Steel, and the ability to travel between 2 whole different ass regions. But like I said, not too much. Despite receiving an 8.7 on Nintendo Power, a higher score than its predecessor, and producing incredible numbers with sales, the game only got a brief mention in that year's GamePro magazine, and the gaming community as a whole wasn't really all that impressed by Silver and Gold, with many fans saying that Pokemon was, quote, on a downwards trend. End quote. With even Junichi Masuda taking notice of this. In my opinion, I think Silver and Gold had some of the most work put into them, from the score all the way to the visuals. I mean, sure, it wasn't too impressive to see generic bird fly me places, but at least you could fly. And also, there's no way in hell you're gonna tell me this ain't a banger. Though again, like I said, fans weren't impressed. So to call these games in particular lazy is just a baseless, purely negative opinion that you should get thrown in stupid jail for. Now, am I saying that they're so high quality that they would hold up on a replay today? Absolutely not. Soul Silver and Heart Gold are definitively better, and you should go play those games right now, after you finish this video, of course. However, what I am saying is that these games screamed quality, and for a sequel, they set the bar pretty high for better and for worse, which is why Junichi Masuda, who was the game director at the time, quote, wanted to bring some elements of play that had never been seen before, end quote. And personally, I think he knocked it out of the park, with what would become known as Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire. At this point in time, Pokemon was a well-established IP, competing in the trading card industry against giants like Magic the Gathering, holding the Western anime scene hostage with its new airing of Advanced Generation, and of course keeping a giant crowd within gaming. Ruby and Sapphire would bring along with it many new features, along with refreshed graphics that are now actually in color. They would also be held in high regards across the board, with IGN giving it a 9.5, and many fans across the world praising it for its insane level of quality for the time. Across the reviews I was able to find from IGN, GameSpot, and Famitsu, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire were praised primarily for their differing stories, and loads of minigames to be found alongside the core experience. Many critics genuinely believed Ruby and Sapphire were an upgrade from the previous 2 entries, and considered these games a worthy investment whether you were a longtime fan or newbie. In my opinion, Generation 3 was an incredible addition to the Pokemon franchise, and brought with it many Pokemon that I would now consider absolute legacy picks. You got the Reggies, the Lotad line, the Swablu line, and arguably some of the most iconic legendary Pokemon within the entire franchise. All of which are Pokemon that I feel are cherished to this very day, and speak to the quality of the design process back then. Despite the taste left in players' mouths after Gen 2, Gen 3 really brought it home and showed that Game Freak was willing to put in the work to create a fresh and more engaging experience. So no, I wouldn't consider these games lazy, not by any means, although the same can't entirely be said for its follow-up. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl would continue the trend of upgraded graphics, going from somewhat static 32-bit visuals to a more refined and expressive form of those same 32-bit visuals. Now Zangoose looked like it was ready for battle, instead of whatever the hell this was. These games were primarily congratulated on their visuals and music, which if you give the OST a listen, is a no-brainer as to why. I actually have a bit of a dissect that I did in another video that you should totally go check out after you're done with this one. Although as far as new mechanics and new forms of gameplay, there wouldn't really be much change. The core experience was the same one since the last games, however the overall plot would up the stakes from world-shattering to reality-shattering. Ultimate was the word used to describe these games by Junichi Masuda himself, with Takeshi Kawachimaru, a developer of Diamond and Pearl, emphasizing that these games would focus on a sense of, quote, player control, end quote, which I think explains a lot of the upgrades found in Generation 4's presentation. The devs were focused on creating what would essentially be the definitive Pokémon game that anybody could get into and play, with the biggest upgrade being the global trading system. And while I think these games nailed the presentation and visuals, I do think Gen 4 began a cycle that would continue to repeat within later games that I'll speak on later. For example, almost all of Gen 3's cast of Pokémon would have their cries recycled from the previous games. And while that doesn't sound like a huge issue, this would create somewhat of a disconnect between the older and newer Pokémon, like Empoleon sounding like a crispy, auditory retelling of a space train going through a tunnel, and then Lugia sounding like an actively crashing computer. The difference in the quality of cries was just too stark. Overall, Gen 4 would score an 8.4 out of 10, nearly across the board, less than the games that came before it, though about the right spot for what would be considered a quality Pokemon game. This would also be when the remakes of Soul Silver and Heart Gold would be made, and not a day goes by that I don't miss the inclusion of what I would consider to be the best Pokemon minigame in Pokemon, the Poke-Athlon. Rest in peace, sweet prince. Then came Generation 5, where the quality just seemed to skyrocket with newly animated sprites, more incredible use of 3D, a storyline that finally tackles the questions we've all been having for years concerning Pokemon battles, and a visually stunning sense of presentation that can be witnessed throughout the entire game no matter what it is you're doing. Text boxes now have this comic book-like look to them. Character sprites were more expressive and distinguishable than ever, and every goddamn sound used in this game just begs for your attention. Pokemon Black and Pokemon White were not fucking around. These games wanted you to experience Pokemon like this shit just dropped for the first time ever and it knew your mind was gonna be blown. These games would ramp up every bit of Pokemon to their fullest at the cost of some features like the minigames and my dearly beloved Poke-Athlon. However, we would still get new content only to be found within Gen 5, such as the Battle Subway, Funfest missions, and hunting down the 7 evil bastards who wanted to rule the world. These games would bring Pokemon to a new height of quality, while surprisingly still getting similar reception from the fanbase to what Gen 2 received. I have never heard more complaints about the designs of certain Pokemon than I have with the ones found in Gen 5. Everybody I've ever known who stopped playing Pokemon around Gen 3 or 4 loves to talk about how many Pokemon were introduced in these games. Whether it's the Vanillux line, Druddigon, Klinklang, or the literal trash Pokemon of Trubbish and Garbodor. Gen 5 received so much shit for its designs that even new players will see these mons and be like, where the fuck did you come from? Regardless, these games scored a 9 out of 10 from IGN, 7.5 from GameSpot, and a 40/40 from Famitsu. These games were received well by critics, but kind of meh by fans, which leads me to wonder if we're the problem? I mean, the two generations that had the most renovation to the core experience, and in my opinion are the highest quality of the franchise, weren't received too well by fans. Definitely makes you think. Sure, the last 5 generations were solid incremental upgrades to what a Pokemon game could be, although no bigger upgrade would be seen, at least as far as the visuals go, as it was with the preceding entries of Pokemon X and Pokemon Y. Now before I dive into all that, why not consider leaving a like on the video, or possibly subscribing? I mean, you're still watching, right? Available for the 3DS, Pokemon X and Y would commit to a fully 3D world, with the titular Pokemon receiving interesting upgrades as far as the 3D models go. Sure, it was amazing to see 718 unique models for each individual Pokemon. However, the life that these creatures used to carry, particularly in their Gen 5 sprite counterparts, was seemingly gone. Most Pokemon just kinda reverted into the most basic animation you could think of when animating a fire-breathing dragon, and sometimes even less. Even with the introduction of the coolest mechanic ever, being Mega Evolution, some of the new Megas just sat there, doing nothing. The lore brought to these games definitely made way for a more fleshed out and realistic Pokemon world, what with the whole war and all. But a lot of mini games would be cut out, being fully replaced by things like Pokemon Ami, which was cool, or things like Battle Chateau, which was honestly super mid. Despite the evolution in visual quality, it felt like these games came with a caveat to everything. Like sure, the Pokemon are all in 3D, but now they're all boring as hell to see in action. Sure, we got to interact with them, but same complaint. And sure, we got this whole world to explore, but with little to nothing to do, that was to the extent of previous entries. I mean, there was that whole Eevee trainer soccer ball thing that I definitely got mileage out of, but not everyone wants to play a minigame to improve their team. Sometimes you just want to see how many bricks your Pokemon can break just for the hell of it. Sorry, I'm still not over it. Point is, Despite the obvious upgrades, it felt like Generation 6 had little to nothing to offer under the hood. Once you got past all the shiny bells and whistles, there seemed to be no substance. Post-game content was severely lacking, with the looker missions being the only cool and worthwhile inclusion. After that, there was just nothing. Now, to be completely fair, we did find out much later through leaks that they did eventually have plans for more, even up to doing a director's cut called Pokémon Z. However, due to time constraints, they weren't able to cram it all in and pop out said director's cut. Regardless, these games sacrifice quality over quantity in the least quality way. So I would argue that this is where the Great Dip happened. What is the Great Dip? I hear you asking? Well, allow me to provide you an example in the form of none other than Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon. Generation 7 was a massive step in a new direction for Pokémon. As I'm sure you remember, they were incredibly proud about announcing that they've done away with Pokémon gyms and that general format. However, what they didn't announce is that everything would take so goddamn long. Getting your starter, entering a battle, running into a trainer, everything in this game tried so hard to wow you with its animations and pizzazz that it just made the process take so goddamn long. These games felt like the culmination of quote-unquote quality that Pokémon had been gunning towards since Generation 5. If shoving stylistic choices down your throat was a video game, it would be Pokémon Sun and Moon. Now obviously, just because a game's pacing is a little slow doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad game, or that it's dipped in quality by any means, and that's why Sun and Moon are the perfect examples. Aside from the battles and intros taking so long, the game overall is just a long-winded mess. The story, while ambitious, was drawn out and ultimately felt like it had nothing to say other than abusing animals is bad, which, wow. Novel concept, Pokemon. You really told me. Plus the Z moves. Oh my god, the Z moves. Not only does a battle take forever to happen, the whole gimmick of the generation is to have these stiff Pokemon do some wildly over-the-top move that takes nearly half a minute to perform. Don't get me wrong, these are kinda cool, and the first time you see them, it's definitely like, holy shit. But then you see them again, and again, and again. And again. Sometimes it just feels like this game is hell-bent on wasting your time. On top of that, that trend I mentioned earlier, this is where it came back. None of the returning Pokemon got refreshed models, let alone refreshed animations. This was our second step within the realm of a 3D Pokemon game, and it felt so half-assed. Now I will give credit where credit is due. Thankfully, these games didn't have any performance issues, aside from the occasional dips in frame rate due to the you-know-what moves. And this would be an improvement as far as the difficulty complaints go. Although, if you were one of the people who thought previous games held your hand, then holy shit should you not play Sun and Moon. Now, is there a quality video game underneath all the forced cutscenes, hand-holding, and long animations? Sure. It's still Pokemon, just with an added effort to create a world you actually give a fuck about. And, while I do think deciding not to bring back every Pokemon like the series had been doing up to this point is kind of lazy, in conjunction with no refreshed models for the Pokemon that did come back, these games did have a bit of effort put into them that can't be ignored. Too bad it got even worse for the next titles. Sword and Shield. Now listen, I personally don't think there's much to complain about for Sword and Shield. They're Pokemon games. That's it. They don't do anything particularly well, but they don't do anything particularly bad in my opinion, aside from the fact that this was the cementation of 3D Pokemon just being ugly and boring as fuck. Game Freak released a statement when these games got released, explaining how they apparently had to remake all the 3D models from scratch. So then why the fuck does Charizard have the same stupid ass look on its face like it did way back in X and Y? If you lost the data, did you just remake this shit and still decide that this lifeless wing flapping shit was cool? This is where the games took a huge nosedive in the quality department. Personally, I don't care if the grass looks a little too shiny, or if the background isn't 1080p at all times. Although, when I'm forced to stare at a Pokemon for hours on end, then I would at least like them to look good or eye-catching. Plus, this is a console game. The best argument I've heard towards this point is when you look at previous games like the Colosseum games. Every Pokemon has so much life, whether they were entering battle, standing idly, or being knocked out. Each Pokemon had so much character that immediately told you who they were by action alone.
Oh, but at this point in time, they were more than 800 plus Pokemon. That would be a lot to animate.
Bro, Pokemon is the highest grossing company to date, and they were back then too. There's no chance in hell they couldn't have put the same work and love into this. Plus, how are you going to show me a game like Super Mario Odyssey on the Nintendo Switch and then tell me that they really thought Generation 8 was comparable? This is where I think the lack of quality stems from and continues to grow from. Mechanically, Pokemon has always been sound. The systems have depth, the collectathon never gets old, and the gameplay loop is tried and true. However, when you stop adding cute little minigames that are genuinely fun, and you've made the focus of your quality be graphical improvements that just can't go any further, let's be honest, then people are going to start noticing the cracks of your game's artistic and visual design, alongside the lack of what you would consider obvious implementations, such as voice acting. Like, who in their goddamn mind thought people would like this? Like, actually, they have sound effects for his shoes moving, they have microphone sounds. How does this scene come off as anything but unfinished and lazy? Especially when there are other titles that are running on the same hardware or even older hardware, but look significantly better. Again, Sword and Shield weren't bad in terms of gameplay by any means, but the polish is what was not on par. And no game, absolutely no Pokemon game, screams these exact words more than Generation 9 with Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. Now, I'm not even going to get into the entire mess that was, and to an extent still is, Scarlet and Violet. Generation 9 was ambitious in its mission, and for that I commend it. The open world was definitely novel, and I really did enjoy the 3 main stories that could be pursued. Though the fact that this game was roughly $22 million to produce, according to leaks, is actually insane. I mean, look at a game like Lethal Company, that definitely did not cost $22 million, and that game was made by one person. And while it isn't visually stellar, it embraced what it had and decided to make its visuals a stylistic choice by applying this weird filter on everything, and has so many quality of life systems that just enhance the gameplay. Now, I'm not saying that Pokemon doesn't have quality of life changes that can be seen within Gen 9, nor am I saying they have the luxury to back up and produce a game that somehow looks less visually impressive than what's come before. I mean, being able to remotely access the PC is great, being able to progressively gain more mobility options within the world is fantastic, and catching Pokemon while on the go will forever be appreciated. Though these games kept a trend that was born within Generation 6, where every new title needs to have a gimmick of sorts that, while it may impact competitive play, does little to nothing to make the core experience feel like it's truly progressed. What if we tried a Pokemon action RPG, where we could take control of the Pokemon themselves and the game became somewhat of an arena fighter, not Pokken? Or what if we just gave more time to the developers so they could produce a game that doesn't lag every time I use your stupid ass gimmick? I don't know. Just so this video isn't completely hopeless and negative, I would like to shine light on what I think is modern day quality. Legends ZA introduced a lot of new mechanics, and with it, a new battle system that I hope isn't relegated to just the Legends games. But it is a step in the right direction, I think. As I've stated before, I think Pokemon has struck gold with its formula. It is a game loop that is tried and true, even in other series. Though I think they need to focus on expanding that formula and polishing it most importantly, rather than shelling out the same thing and giving it a new, low-quality textured skin. That is why I truly think Pokemon has fooled the entire world, myself included, by releasing some genuinely cutting-edge titles over the course of a decade or so, and convincing us that quality is all Pokemon games hold. They have deceived us into believing that any future titles will be the best they can do. They have struck gold with a fundamentally fun game loop and persuaded us to not care about the visuals nor the extra tidbits that bring a game to life. Why worry about voice acting when we know you're only here to get some new megas? Why worry about the textures of some buildings when you're more interested in completing the Pokedex? They've convinced us that they're still trying to impress when they gave that shit up a long time ago. So is Pokemon a garbage franchise? No, not at all. Though unfortunately, it has fooled us all into believing it's a quality experience. Thank you so much for watching this video if you did, and thank you even more so to those of you who came over from Wilnef's stream. I really seriously appreciate it. If you really did enjoy this video, then please leave a like. It really shows the algorithm that people want to see more of this, especially since I'm such a small channel. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. With that, my name is Zenrold, and I will catch you all later. Peace.